In the first part of my interview with Gracie Nebel, she revealed how to research senior living communities to find the perfect new home for your loved one. Gracie is the Vice President of Operations and Sales and Marketing at Melody Living, an award-winning senior living community. You can see the first part of my talk with the senior living expert here. Now, in the second part of our interview, Gracie shares her insider tips on what to do and what to look for as you tour the senior living facilities where you're considering moving your loved one. What should you see during a tour? Whom should you ask to meet? When should you bring the potential resident for a visit? And why is the parking lot so important? This is a decision where you want as much help as you can get. Let Gracie help you make it. So let's say we've narrowed down the search, whether it's locally near the adult who's looking to put a loved one to rehouse a loved one, or it's in the loved one's neighborhood, or maybe they always want to retire to Florida and you're looking for a place that neither one of you lives. So you want to make sure the places you go, that you can actually handle visiting them, touring them physically. So what tips do you have for people who are visiting facilities for the first time and making this momentous decision?
I always like to tell people to, like, literally as soon as you pull in the parking lot, start looking, meaning, look to see, are they taking care of the grounds of the outside of the building? Is landscaping, kept up? Is there trash all over the parking lot, or is it nice and pristine? To me, that's a very first indicator of what you can expect when you walk in the building. Is it going to be clean on the inside also? Or is it going to look disheveled if the outside looks disheveled? So, curbside appeal should be important to everybody. The community should be taking pride in the outside as much as they do the inside, because this is, again, the home of all these residents, all these seniors, and they should be proud to have anybody come to visit them. So I say it starts there. Check the curb appeal and make sure they're paying as much attention to that as they are when you walk through the doors. And again, same thing, when you walk through the doors, start making note of, are there any odors that are not pleasant, or are there scents that are very pleasant? Start taking note of the residents. If there's any residents that are out and about, what do they look like? Do they look happy? Do they look engaged with the staff? Or are staff just walking past them and not even acknowledging them? So these are all things you can take in as you walk in the door before you even sit and talk with anybody. Because again, they are telltale signs of what you can expect, of what your loved one can expect once should you choose that community. It's nice to have a very aesthetically pleasing community, but at the same time, you can have a beautiful community and not have residents engaged or staff engaged with the residents, and not have, great meal service, or, just that feeling of belonging occurring. So you really want to make sure you're getting the full package, not just, a beautiful community or aesthetically pleasing, but that feeling that you get, that your loved one will experience when they move there and there as well, should have equal weight bearing in the decision. Um, Once you are connected with a salesperson and you're sitting down and you're having a conversation, again, it's so important that before you tour any community, that you've created your list of questions. Again, create your list of what's important to your parent or grandparent, what's important to you, that's going to give you peace of mind in your final decision. Have those questions ready. Know what you're looking for from the perspective of, again, amenities being offered, pricing, what's included in that monthly rent, what's not included. Again, the care things that we mentioned earlier. But also, again, like I said, the day-to-day life of the community, what your loved one is going to be able to anticipate. And don't be afraid to ask your questions. My recommendation would be, maybe typically when you tour a community, you walk in, you sit and talk with the sales director, sales representative. They walk you through the community, they show you a model apartment, and then you come back and you sit down and you kind of wrap up the tour experience. So my recommendation is, start off with that first sit part of the tour process and give your initial information of what you're looking for your loved one. They'll ask a series of questions of, again, names, contact information, that kinds of stuff, style of apartment, because then that'll showcase, they'll know what apartment style to showcase and show you. Um, Again, as you're walking through, this is the time to be observant of the resident life. Again, look to see, are residents smiling? Are they engaged? Are there activities going on? Sometimes it's a smart idea to tour community during maybe a lunch or a dinner. And maybe even, ask if that can be incorporated into the tour experience. If you have your parent or grandparent with you, they can maybe sit down and sample a meal, because then again they can experience firsthand what they could anticipate once they move in. So that's always a good thing to look at too, because you want to taste it. Everybody can say they have great meal service, but getting to experience it would be a great plus to the tour experience. So that's another thing to make note of. But again, as you're walking through the community, so important to just really pay attention to how the residents look, how they are engaged with the staff, with each other even, because you want to make sure your parent has friends and can make friends once they get there. And then, again, they're going to show you through the community. Just pay attention to things. Is it clean? Again, are there any odors? Is it well kept? And then again, they'll show you the model apartment most likely, which will be a sample of what you can anticipate. And then they'll walk you back to the most likely the discovery room, or where you were sitting for the initial conversation. And this is a time where you'll ask more specific questions, maybe again, of like the staffing ratios you were talking about earlier, of maybe, say, hey, my mom is a member, of a book club, and that's so important to her. Do you have that going on here? So you can get into more of the specifics about your parent or your loved one to find out how they're going to fit in. And again, or maybe even experience a meal. So these are again some good points to make note of, and to start your list of how you want the tour to go. One of the things that I would also recommend when you call to schedule the tour is let them know what's important to you. Meaning, if nutrition's important, because maybe mom hasn't had, the best nutrition at home, and she hasn't been eating, very nutritionally balanced meals, and she's maybe lost some weight. So it's important to you that she gets back on track with that. So I would even say, when I come tour tomorrow, I would actually like to meet your culinary director or whoever heads up your dining department, because I have some specific questions for them about how they plan their menu, or, what if my mom doesn't like meatloaf and that's what you're serving? What are her options? So it's okay to ask to speak to specific members of the team as well. Or maybe what's of greater concern to you is maybe, mom is a diabetic and she hasn't been managing that well. And so you want to speak to the person who oversees clinical services, the care services, because you want to ask how they're going to make sure that mom's diabetic needs are going to be met. So again, it's okay to ask to speak to specific members of the leadership team that are going to have an impact on what you're looking for in the support services for your loved one.
And what about their experience? In other words, is it okay to ask how many years they've been doing this, or are most of the people actually full-time, or do they use staff from various staffing agencies?
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, especially at this time, because there seems to be a staffing shortage. COVID really had an impact on, just the healthcare. Again, it's such a great weight that a lot of the care staff were bearing with the ever-changing fluidity of COVID. And so there was a lot of burnout. And so, the healthcare industry is really kind of on a revamping of building their staff. And so it's okay to ask, how is your staffing? It's okay to ask what happens if you have a staffing shortage. What's your plan B? Because a lot of entities are having to use, support from staffing agencies, from third-party staffing agencies. And it's important to know if that's an option, or do they just not replace that, staff person if things are short. Longevity of staff is also a key indicator of, the environment of the community. Do the staff feel appreciated? Do they feel valued? Because if they do, then most likely they're going to turn around and treat every resident with that same level of respect and dignity and value. So yeah, a community that has significant longevity in not only their leadership team, but their frontline staff as well is an indicator of the environment that has been created for everyone, not just the residents, but also the staff who, again, obviously you want happy staff because that means they'll be more energetic and engaged with the resident population there. So that's equally important.
And many facilities will have like a daily calendar, whether printed or on the wall. It's important to take a look and see what activities are being scheduled for the day of your tour, see what they have and what they may not be offering.
Yeah, actually, what's a great thing to do, because a lot of places also even have that posted on the website, but that is actually a great idea, because if you go in the community and they show you the activity and maybe it's 10:30 and maybe an activity was supposed to start at 10 o'clock, you can kind of check to see is what, if they said they were going to be doing book club or, crafts, check to see if that's really what's happening. Because anybody can build a great activity calendar, but you want to make sure that they're actually executing on it. And even ask to take a copy of it if you're conducting the initial tour and maybe you haven't brought your loved one yet because you want to narrow it down to your top 3 choices or 2 choices. Ask for a sample of that activity calendar to take with you so that you can share it with your loved one if they weren't with you at the time.
Having your loved one with you for the visit, what are the pros and cons of doing that on like your first visit to a facility, having the potential resident there with you?
Well, you know what? There's so many different situations, because sometimes the adult child is starting the process and they actually haven't even had the conversation with their loved one, and maybe are deciding, what, I'm going to do the initial, research and pick, again, like I said, top 2 or 3, and then I'll bring mom or dad or grandparent, which can be fine because it can be overwhelming, for that senior. It's a big step for them to take, to acknowledge that they're at a point where they need support, on a 24/7 basis. And so sometimes it's good to minimize the stress of walking and, hearing so much information brought forward. It can be really overwhelming to the senior if you're going to start off with maybe 5 or 6 communities. That can be really overwhelming for the senior. So sometimes it's a good idea to narrow down those options, those choices to, like I said, maybe the top 2 or 3 that you feel are going to meet their needs, and then just have them join you with those. That typically works out best because, like I said, it can be really overwhelming, and it can all start meshing together in regards to the information that's identified during the tours. Once you do make the decision to bring them with you, again, same thing. It's important to even almost start from ground one with the community by, again, sharing, okay, I'm bringing mom or dad with me. They'd really like to experience a meal, or, they want to talk to some residents. Maybe I think that's a great idea too, is to find out, like, okay, mom loves to read. Do you have other residents who like to read? She'd like to maybe have the opportunity to meet some of these folks to know if she's going to blend in, or, she just kind of wants to have a conversation with them and see how they feel. How long have they lived there? What was their transition like? How are they liking it there? What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? And that's something I would actually strongly recommend, is to, once you bring your loved one into the community for the tour, I do strongly recommend that you ask if they can have some, time with some of the residents who are living there already, because I think that's a great indicator of A, their willingness to do so, but also B, for the resident to be able to actually have those conversations and maybe even get, a name or 2 of some of the people who could be their future, roommate or, community mates. And so they can get a feel for, am I going to belong here or am I not going to belong here? So there's some different things there. Like I said, I do strongly recommend some early research in narrowing down of community choices before you bring the prospective resident into the picture, just because again, it can be very overwhelming if you're trying to go through 5 or 6 communities with them.
And I'd imagine if you narrow it down to 2 or 3 that you're happy with, bringing mom in and leaving the final decision up to her is going to make it much easier for her to transition there, as that she's got to make the choice herself.
Absolutely. And that is really important as well, for them to feel and actually be, not just feel it, but actually be a part of that final decision making process, because it's them. They're going to be there 24/7, 365. They're the ones that are going to be truly the end user, and they need to know that they weren't just dumped somewhere and somebody made this big decision on their behalf. That ownership piece of the decision making is a big step for them in acceptance and acknowledging this is the next step. It's okay, and I was a part of that decision. It's very, very important to have them be a part of that final decision, especially when you're looking at assisted living. When you're at a point where you may be searching for memory care services, it may be a little bit different. You still want to bring them, because that is still important to incorporate them into the tour process. It just adds a different level of the decision-making responsibility between the adult child and the end user, the resident.
Well, I think what's also important is helping people start this journey to find a place for their loved one to live. And I really appreciate you taking the time. And hopefully we can talk again about more insider tips for choosing a senior living community for a loved one.
Sounds great, Jeff. I appreciate it.